First and foremost, before we get going, I'd like to say thank you to the three of you for joining me. I've been looking forward to having this conversation for a minute, and I feel like there's a level of elevation that's necessary for this discourse to actually happen, and more so like for us to move forward with. I think folks in this day and age are just like, oh, that's a problem, and pointing out problems and canceling people just isn't really a part of the solution. And I guess first and foremost, before we go into it, do you think cancel culture will bring about the society that we'd like to live in?
My initial instinct is it's a distraction, right? I mean, you said it best. You said it's not part of the solution, right? It's like, for me, cancel culture is continuing to perpetuate this myth that we have like a real collective power just by social media expression, right? So like we're on social media, it's like Barack said, don't boo, vote, right?
Yes. Yes.
And I think even talking about cancel culture is just like a manifestation of that, right? Like, are we really voting? Are we really doing something? Are we just talking about, like, there are celebrities whose livelihood depends on like an attention economy, right? So like that's true. If your success is predicated on social media, sure, like canceling you on Twitter is going to have a meaningful effect.
Sure.
But for all intents and purposes, like canceling somebody isn't doing something, isn't a real vote, isn't a real action. And I think it's with rare exception you would see somebody who really is canceled, like by that means. Yeah.
I think for me, I asked the question, why do we cancel in the first place? And we cancel in the first place because of this notion that whatever someone is spouting, mixed with the amount of power or like perceived authority they have, is like a deadly combo, right? Now, if that's the case, if we just cancel as soon as someone is in the wrong, well, we've all been wrong because we're all human.
Facts.
So therefore, if we cancel everyone, there's no one left. So I think when we think about the world that we want, essentially we want a world where canceling someone teaches people, hey, this is actually not healthy.
Yeah.
This is actually not okay, and this is a misstep. But that requires making mistakes. The only way you learn is by making mistakes. That's the only way you grow. So I don't think cancel culture will bring about the world we want, because the world we want is one where people have learned from the mistakes of those before. But if we don't allow people to make mistakes and then give them the chance to grow from them because we canceled you,
Facts.
then how can we have that future?
Facts. Nobody gets better. I think that's the main point too. It's one of those things where like it's trendy, it's cool, it's something that's fun, and for some people it feels a bit like empowering, because now it's like I get to contribute to the discourse. Now I have a say so, and if I drag you enough on Twitter, then I can sway the way we as a people see you.
Right.
But it's not about the individual. It's about like what's the action at hand? Like what was the malfeasance? What was the wrongdoing that we need to speak to? And the thing that's interesting about it is it's not about extinguishing behavior. It's about, in my opinion, seeking to understand. And I just think that's a conversation that we're not trying to do. No one's seeking to understand. It's just fun to point the finger. And I'm just over all that.
I worry about cancel culture. The way I look at it is that it makes people feel like they're judge and jury.
Yes.
And you don't need to be judge and jury on everything. You
No.
just don't. Right. And the other thing that really worries me is a self-inhibitor. Meaning if you're afraid that if you speak up or say something or take a position, you may be punished for it, you may not do it.
Yes.
And we actually may need you to do that at that moment more than ever.
Yes.
Right? So it's a self-inhibitor.
Yes.
So to think that everybody needs to be judge and jury, I think it's just a mistake. You don't need to be on every single issue.
Facts.
Plus everybody gets to vote with their feet on every single subject. So if it bothers you, fine, weigh in. But you don't have to weigh in just because it showed up on Twitter.
True.
And you have something to say about it. It may not really matter.
Facts.
It is something, I forgot what you said that resonated with me, but there's something about the visceral collective reaction to cancel culture though, right? Like at the very least, at least cancel culture is providing people that don't have a voice, right? And like social media can do that generally. So that's powerful, right? That's cool that you can begin a conversation because of a movement like that. And it's not, again, like I think it's a myth that these things are having the impact that we want them to, but at least we're having a conversation about it. But ultimately it's like people are reacting this way because there are, like, Black Twitter is saying something and people don't want to hear about it.
Facts.
Like it's like it's tweeting, not to be corny, but tweeting truth to power, right? And that, like, that's what's interesting about the conversation for me is like, okay, that maybe we should talk about that piece and worry less about like, oh, you're canceled, because that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Now,
The way I see it.
to piggyback on that, because I think that is a 100% valid point, it does put essentially a microscope on things that do matter in that way. But for example, Flint's not had clean water for how many years now? You know, like we cancel people, but what does that mean? Like people were still streaming R. Kelly. Like the Catholic Church is still alive, thriving, and owning a whole lot of property and doing well. So like, it's great to point fingers, and there's this whole illuminating problems that's absolutely beneficial. But then where do the change agents come in? And what does change look like in said environment?
The problem with that issue, sometimes people feel as if they've accomplished something just by doing it.
Yeah.
Right? But you've only just shine a light on it. You haven't actually fixed it.
Yeah.
Right? Like how many people are talking to their sons and daughters about things not to do when R. Kelly comes up? It's like, no, let's just talk about canceling his music out. Yeah. Well, for me, I'm more worried about explaining to my sons that this is not how you treat women.
Yes.
And my daughter, this is not how you let a man treat you.
Yes.
Like to me, that's actually where you accomplish something.
Yes.
Yeah.
By just canceling out R. Kelly, that has no effect on me and my family's life day to day. So, to me, whether he's still making music or not,
It doesn't even matter.
it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Or you get mad at CEOs of companies and you say, well, we're going to boycott their product. I'm like, first off, they're rich already. So you boycott that company.
That's right.
You boycott the company. That's not making them unrich, right? But what you are doing, you may actually, some people that need the money may lose jobs. And you're not thinking about those second, third, and fourth order effects.
Yeah.
So when you boycott Chick-fil-A or whatever, there's a lot of poor black people in the
That
South
work at
that work for
Chick-fil-A.
Chick-fil-A. And again, the CEO, he's rich anyway. You're not going to change his mind.
Fact.
So I just think again, you got to go to the second, third, and fourth order effects, not just that first.
Yeah.
Fact.
And I feel like that's something with canceling. Like canceling doesn't go to that next level.
Right.
Like canceling is a surface level reaction. And I think I agree with what you said. I honestly think some of it comes from this, I don't know if helplessness is the right word, but I think it comes from this place of,
I think that is the right word.
You know what I mean? Okay, like we don't know what else to do about
Yes.
this. And I honestly think that's how people feel.
Yes.
Like we don't know what else to do about these large scale problems that we feel like our parents were talking about, our grandparents were talking about, our great-grandparents were talking about, the history books were talking about. And so it's like we see something stare us in the face and we're like, oh my gosh, okay, racism, I'm just going to cancel them.
Right.
Because it's like, I don't know what else to do.
But they're still racist, by the way.
Exactly.
Yes.
Here's the thing, like not only are they still racist, but the people who agree with them see the cancellation and as opposed to going, I want to engage the culture, they go, I'm going to avoid the culture and I'm actually going to now dig further into my beliefs and double down on my thoughts because I've seen the treatment of the, you know what I mean? And so we're actually creating a rift in some way because we're creating a whole nother culture that's like, well, we're just being persecuted. And we're being persecuted by cancel culture, so we're going to stay in our bubble. I'm going to whisper my beliefs to you, and I'm not going to say it out here where they can be challenged because no one's going to challenge and grow me. I'm just going to be canceled.
And social media is so seductive that way.
Yeah.
Right? That's obviously the danger about, that Barack quote, like don't boo vote, right? It's so seductive. You have a voice, you got to retweet. God forbid to cancel whoever you're canceling, that really picks up steam, and who knows, maybe Oprah retweets you and you're like, oh my God, I did it. But you didn't do anything. You didn't do a thing. You didn't
changed the world.
Yeah, you didn't do a thing.
I feel like the first time I saw something like this with the social media storm was Joseph Kony. And remember there's that video, Kony, I think it was Kony 2020 or something like that they called it, or Kony 2011. It was back when I was in college. And the video was about him in Africa going and like stealing children and making them soldiers. And it was an organization at the time that was over there doing this work. And you just saw people sharing left and right, liking on Facebook. Like Facebook was not super new, but still relatively new. Twitter, the same thing. And there was this steam that picked up. And everyone was like, oh my gosh, like we're changing the world like by sharing this. And I was like, okay, but like, are we giving money? Are people actually going over there? And it was the first time that I remember seeing where we had kind of bought into this idea that we were sharing simply by liking. That by us doing that, it was changing everything. And I think it's important to speak up, but I think sometimes if you only just go, okay, I can't sit silent, so I'm going to make a post. It's like, cool, but then how does that post
lead to something?
Like reflect in your daily life? What change do you go and act after you make that stance?
I think that's something similar to the number of people that are tired of sending hopes and prayers. Prayers and thoughts. Like that's one of those things. It's like, oh no, like we've noticed what happens with that. And I think it's one of those things where, that's just what's what I'm looking for? Illumination is not a solution, and
Yeah.
Right.
I think it's the first step.
It could start. Right, it's a start.
100%.
It's something.
100%.
But I think if we stop there,
Yeah.
Right.
and I think that's, I mean, I said this to you the other day, I said I do fear that we're creating a world that, because we're always raising the awareness level, we're going to be incredibly aware and non-active.
That's right.
Yeah.
You know,
I
so
would
it's
agree with
possible
that.
20
I think
years.
that's powerful.
It's possible.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
20 years from now, we're like, oh my gosh, like, I've had so many conversations with like white people, and white people have so many conversations with me. Like, you're so aware of racism.
Yep.
I'm glad that you're aware. I'm glad we had the conversation. And it's like, cool. Now, what action have we taken? Oh, no.
Right, true.
We're not taking action.
That's right.
We're just becoming aware.
True.
Like, and it's like, okay, so we're just becoming wildly aware
Right.
and non-active, and things won't change. You know, and so
Yep.
it's just like, where does the action come in?
Yeah, as our mutual friend says, don't admire the problem. Right?
Facts.
Yeah, I'm tired of
Facts.
admiring the problem.
Yeah.
We know what the problem
Yes.
is.
Yeah.
You know,
100%.
what now?
100%.
And you know, that also makes me think, like,
Keep us on track. I'm gonna go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that more about social media. It's like, it's so performative that canceling, not only does it not work, right, but it feeds the problem. Yeah, I mean, not needless to say, like, it is a purely attention economy. It's not a good or a bad one. It's attention, you know, and likes are likes and tweets are tweets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like, you've turned, I mean, I think about our president, right? You've turned a villain
Perfect
into
example.
almost a heel.
Yeah.
Right? It's
Yeah.
like I'm watching a wrestling match,
Yeah.
and we're having a fun time admiring a problem.
Yeah.
It's weird.
I'm waiting for the baby face to make
that's
the
a great
comeback.
analogy.
Yeah, right.
That's a great analogy, though. And in fact, that's probably not the sole reason why it's so mainstream. But when you have like a tweeter in chief that's out here just getting it in, it's really, really hard to not have conversations like this.
Yeah.
So, in reference to grace, evolution, and cancel culture, should we ever be lenient? When people make mistakes, like how do we go about people, okay, if we're going to get better, what does better look like?
Yeah.
Because I feel like that part is also really, really important, and that
Yeah.
also leads to us having constructive conversations that actually makes it so that people aren't afraid to share their views that might not be the best or might not be the most like socially accepted,
Yeah.
yet they're still looking to get better. I feel like there's probably large swaths of people that actually want to be a part of the solution, that want to have these conversations at the same time, like ruining my livelihood and
Yeah.
my means is just not something that I'm interested
Right.
in doing. And we're not making it safe for folks to improve.
Yeah. I think the problem is that actually fixing the problem is seen as being lenient. I think those things have become, I'm like, one and the same. So, for instance, you have an athlete on a team
Yeah.
who tweets get dragged up from when they were in high school.
Yes.
Saying an insane amount of things that were like crazy racist, et cetera,
Yeah,
right?
homophobic, yep.
Right, and like homophobic, all these different things, okay? And then like what happens in evidence? Okay, well, we're gonna part ways with this person, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the reality is that that person being in a space with the very groups that they've kind of offended will actually help them grow. But the conversation becomes, do we subject those groups to that? Because it becomes something for me where it's like, oh, hey, like, you know, like, I'm not a magical Negro. So I'm not going to be able to change every person that looks at me as less and go, well, why don't you just bring them to me? They're going to come to my house, spend some time, find out we're good human beings. You know what I mean?
True.
Is that actually how it works? But I think it becomes where sometimes trying to fix the problem ends up looking like being lenient. And I don't think that's the solution to everything.
But I also think that
Right.
leniency in that circumstance is actually the solution. Like that's what it is that we have to do. And the narrative to piggyback upon that, which gets a little frustrating, is
Yeah.
when black folks say, "I'm tired of being woke," and this, that, and the third. Like if you really want change, if you really want things to get better, it's not that you got to be like a magical Negro, because I see where you're coming from with that too.
Yeah.
At the same time, we have to make ourselves available to having such conversations and like being in that rough spot where it's just like I'm trying to explain the way I perceive white privilege to you, and I just need you. We have to be open to having the tough kind of conversations, which means being around folks who don't agree or fully always recognize or understand your humanity and still moving forward with it. But yeah,
I think that just has to be something that actually leads towards something. Because I think the reason people get frustrated with that is because people feel I always have this conversation and it ends the same way. I always do this and it turns out the same way.
Yeah.
And I think we then get to a space of, okay, I just want to work and move forward with those who actually want progress. Like we talked about so
Yeah.
this whole idea that you and I can argue all day long, or I can work with you because we agree and we can actually make change. And so I think when you look at cancel culture, I think the driving force behind why it's this kind of collective energy is because people are going, okay, I don't want to argue with those who don't get it. I want to build with those who do.
Yeah.
And so that's the first step of like a building block. The problem is that we're kind of living in a world where we're told that we've actually built the pyramid and all we did was drag a couple bricks over and go, here it is. But I do think there's this collective idea of, okay, I want to build a future with those who understand and spend less time arguing with those who don't, because there's always gonna be folks who don't.
True.
And if I spend all my time arguing with those who don't, I'm going to neglect out on all the things I could have done with those who actually do.
Yeah.
Like generally, people need to start being more comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? Like I don't know why it is that it's so difficult for well, I'll speak for myself, for me, right? All the time to say like, hey, it makes me uncomfortable when I'm in a room and everybody else is black in the room, right? Like that. Maybe not uncomfortable is the right word, but like it has an effect on the way that I'm behaving and the way that I'm thinking. What does that mean? How can I navigate that? And can I have a conversation with you about that? Sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
I can have a conversation with a lot of people about that.
Yes.
I have a conversation with my mother about that.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And people need to learn how to just talk about it
Yeah.
before they do anything else.
Facts.
You know, I'm tired of people pretending that they don't think that way.
Yes.
You know, they're not,
Yeah.
they're not
Well,
thinking
I'm
the
colorblind.
same thing in that moment.
Yeah.
Everybody's feeling that. Don't
Yeah.
mind it.
Well, sometimes you got to do it without an agenda. I mean, you shouldn't do it with an agenda that I'm going to change this person. You can learn a lot from people that you'll never change. You don't see eye to eye on.
Yeah.
It's just what it is, and you shouldn't be upset about that.
Yeah. That's good.
You know, no, I think you should align your time with those you think you can move forward with. But at the same time, I don't think there's anything wrong with being around somebody who says, you know what, he's the way he is, he's not going to change.
Yeah.
That's fine. There's still a lot for you to learn.
Yeah.
You know, because you're around people that think the way you think. That's just confirming evidence.
Yeah.
You know, you need people that are going to bring in some other thoughts, and I think you got to be okay with that too. You don't have to change them.
Yeah.
You know, you don't have to, right? Because first off, there's a myth that you can. You know, in a lot of ways.
I think that's the word right there. I think that's the word right there.
It's always
that
like
you can.
it's always like this goal that, you know, one day we're all going to be in harmony and think the same way. It's like, well, first of all, it's never going to happen. You know, and second, that's okay that it's not going to happen. But I think if people are okay being themselves and being able to express themselves, you know, you come to find out maybe it's not that bad being around those people. You know, and by the way, you can still have a common goal. You know, you talk about athletes. I mean, listen, you don't need to think alike at all to be able to move the ball down the field.
So win a chip.
You know what I mean? And it was no different from from the military.
Yeah.
And that's why they integrated the military. You know, because at the end of the day, you know, it was for us to survive this war.
Yeah.
You know, so you know, I think we got to be comfortable with that too. So
Yeah. That's really good. That's really good.
That was a solid point.
Yeah. I do think leniency.
I love I just super love the whole. It's a myth that you can actually like it's actually a waste of time to think that you can get everybody to think the way you do.
Yeah.
So that shouldn't even be the point blank period.
Right.
It's just that I think that's solid.
Yeah, it's exposure, right? Like that is what has done more for me to try and understand what people of color go through, right? It's like quite literally just being exposed, right? Like you're so right about not having an agenda. You're so right about having a conversation.
Yeah.
because the reality is, I mean, listen, you are clearly woke, but at the
Yes.
same time, you'll never truly understand what it's like to be black. But you don't have to.
And that's not the point. Facts.
Right.
Facts.
Yeah.
Facts.
You saying
Facts.
I may never understand what it's like to be black. To me, we're good.
Yeah.
You don't have to say anything else.
Yeah.
You know, got it.
But I think for one of us, for one of us to have the point of like, you need to get,
You need to understand. You have to. It's like, no, you don't.
Yeah,
You know?
and I think it's also real that if you can change someone's mind, that means someone else can too.
Right.
So if you come in and go, I'm going to change their mind, it's like, cool. Well, guess what? 5 minutes later, someone else just destroyed it. So I hope you go back to the drawing board and do all that, you know. But I think with leniency, I think there needs to be leniency for the difference between someone being ignorant and someone being more on the intentional side. I think
Elaborate on that a little bit.
so. I forgot Jeremy Lin. So a few years ago, Jeremy Lin was hot with the Knicks. All this stuff was going right.
Linsanity.
There was So like Linsanity was huge, and there was a writer who wrote an article when Jeremy Lin hit like a rough patch and the Knicks weren't doing well, and it was basically the headline was, "Is Jeremy Lin the chink in the Knicks armor, right?
That's what they. Whoa, who wrote that?
Yeah, right? Okay.
Who wrote that?
Are they still employed?
No. Not at all. Not at all.
Wow.
Right? So this person gets fired, becomes a whole thing. Folks who work for newspapers are like, well, really it should be on the editor because the editor's the one who actually lets it go to final
I
reading.
agree with that too.
Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Now, long story short, they do an interview with this guy. And this guy basically is like, hey, I had no idea that this was a racial slur.
Sure.
Like, starts talking about his experience, all these kinds of things. Now, here's the thing. We know it's a slur,
Yes.
but we also live in a reality where we're highly aware of slurs
Facts.
because of the fact that we're either woke, of color, etc.
Yes.
There are people who are of a certain color that have never heard half the slurs that they could be called and have no idea. And so I think for that, you know what, I completely agree they should have been fired. You know what I mean? There has to be repercussions for your actions. But then when you go to the next job interview, nah, fam, you're racist. We can't hire you.
Right.
Or is it like you were ignorant, you were not aware, you didn't know, and when presented with truth and facts, you received them in a way that you want to grow. And so I think sometimes, and I don't want to say it's, all on us, but I do think there's a responsibility to approach something offensive as if it's ignorance. Give someone a chance to show you that they are ignorant.
Right.
And go, hey, hold up a second. That's mad sexist. Let's talk about that. Now, if it becomes, I don't have a sexist bone in my body, I came from a woman, blah, 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 blah. Okay,
Right.
that was the best. We're going to have to cut this off, right?
True.
But if it becomes, whoa, can you educate me on this?
Right.
Can you tell me why? I actually don't want to come across that way, and I want to learn.
Yes.
I think there's a difference. But I think if we come out the gate, yo, you're sexist, you're canceled. It's
That's not the point. Yeah. That's not helpful.
I didn't know, but now I'm canceled. I can't even talk to anyone about it. I can't learn.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think, and so I think being lenient really has to come in where it's like, okay, was this ignorance? Because at times it is. Yeah. And then how does that ignorance kind of respond to truth?
I actually think we need more leniency now than ever.
Yes.
Because people
That's what
are
I'm trying to get
more
at, yes.
sensitive than ever. It's almost like, if you're ever in a deposition, they always say before you answer a question, take a deep breath, even if you know the answer. You're like, what's your name? You clearly know what the answer is, but they say take a deep breath anyway before you answer, because it allows you that one moment, to avoid a mistake if you're going to make one.
Right.
I feel like we should get to that place, just like with him.
Yeah.
It was like maybe he didn't know.
Yeah.
Shame on a bunch of people that it still came out, but
Exactly.
he still may not have known.
Yeah.
And I just think we've become so heightened, so sensitive. And we also know that we have a medium to sort of get that out. Like, I'm mad, and I know there's a medium for me to get it out.
Yeah.
But a lot of times, you should just probably take a step back and just say, wait a minute. First off, he wasn't talking to me. Maybe he didn't know.
Yeah.
And that 1 second can make that much of a difference, right?
Yeah.
It could save this guy's job or career, to your point, because
Yeah.
maybe now he can't get a job. I just kind of feel like that leniency we need more now than ever because the sensitivity is so high. More now than ever.
Yeah.
I 100%
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah.
And I also feel like in this day and age, too, there are so many more people seeking to understand that we need to be as lenient as possible. That we need to be as open to having those kind of conversations just because it matters.
Yeah.
And
I think a lot of people are asking the questions, how can I know about this? How can I get back? You know what I mean? And it's like, I think people are asking those questions, and I think we are in this hypersensitive, hyper-aware, and I think, I understand that it comes from this place of, okay, for so long, we would excuse sexism, right? Mm-hmm. So for so long,
still do some folks.
For so long, you had the boss patting someone on the butt. Hey, those melons look great. You pick them from the store. You know what I mean?
Right.
All these different things they're saying.
Right.
For so long, we would excuse racism. Well, they're from a different time. Or, okay, I know he made that joke,
old.
but he doesn't have a racist bone in his body, right? For so long, we would excuse it that people are like, hey, I can't excuse this anymore. Yeah. I'm going to call it exactly what it is, no matter where it lands on the spectrum, which racism, sexism, all the isms are on a spectrum, right? No matter where it lands on the spectrum, I'm going to call it exactly what it is. So there's a hypersensitivity of we have to eradicate this, but we have to go about it the right way. Because if we look at the world 20 years from now, and if we continue to do this, will we have eradicated anything?
No. Right.
Or will we have created a world where everyone just hides all their isms, which is arguably more dangerous?
100%.
100%.
Yep.
So
in reference to grace evolution and in cancel culture, there's some examples that are pretty prevalent, pretty popular in mainstream right now that I definitely want to touch base upon, just because I feel like we as a society handled each case differently, yet for the majority of them, at least for these two examples, it's the same crime.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of curious to hear your feedback on it and just, once again, elevate the convo. So the first one is going to be the infamous, especially because we're in Chicago, R. Kelly, and the way, what was the name of that documentary that just came out? Surviving R. Kelly. And like the fallout behind that and how the signs were so clear and so obvious for years, yet we turned a blind eye to it.
Yeah.
I think that's a conversation worth having, especially then comparing that to our treatment of Michael Jackson in his documentary.
Right.
Like, in your eyes, I guess, let's compare them both. How are they the same and how are they different? And then on top of that, how do you think we as a society went about handling both circumstances?
I feel they both share extremely troubled men, like continuing to live in a cycle of the hurt that they experienced then hurting other people.
Yes.
I think with R. Kelly, it's a very sensitive topic, so 100% clear off the bat, like no excuse, no justification, nothing's okay about it, not at all. When the interview with Gayle King was going around, people highlighted a lot of different points. The thing that stuck out to me the most was when she asked him. She said, Robert, you were abused from the ages of 6 to 13, and how did that affect you? And like that, he goes, it didn't affect me at all.
Immediately.
Not one bit. And she's like, well, not all who have been abused become abusers, but many abusers have been abused.
Yes. Right.
You're saying this didn't affect you one bit. He goes, not at all. Didn't affect me one bit. So for me, I literally saw that and I paused it and was like, holy crap.
I want to pause real quick,
Yeah.
just because, do you think he said that because he still wanted to presume his innocence?
Yes.
I don't think he's being truthful in that moment.
Because he said something different in the GQ article 2 years earlier.
Okay, yeah.
When he said that, because he was abused, he was aware of his sexuality at a much younger age, which made him more sexual at a much younger age.
Yeah.
So to me, he was lying in one of those two things, right?
Yeah.
I didn't know about that.
And this is like 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And this is like 2 years ago, this article.
Okay,
Easy to figure out when he was lying, I think.
Exactly. Right,
clearly.
There's a point. I think if he was telling the truth in that Gayle King interview, I think it shows that he's in a pure fantasy land
Which he should be now.
Which
Right.
he could be.
Full defense mode right now. Right.
Which in ways explains the outburst. Once again, doesn't justify it.
Right.
But a lot of the time they talk about how if you experience trauma at a young age, whenever anything related to it comes up
Absolutely.
again, you actually go back to that age.
That's right.
So we see him acting as a young prepubescent boy,
Right.
unable to control his emotions,
Yes.
unable to process his actions.
Yes.
It's like when you find out like a little kid did something wrong. No, I didn't do that. I didn't do that. It's like
Exactly what happened. That's exactly what
Right.
happened. Yeah.
But he essentially is unable to. So I think there's that. And then I think you look at Michael and you look at Neverland, all these things. Well, he was never allowed to be a kid.
Right.
He was never allowed to have a childhood. He literally, came from this household where there was the standards and the rules. And I know there's some could be conflicting stories on what occurred there, but it obviously wasn't an easy upbringing by any means.
Right.
Then he's thrust into this unforgiving world where he's passed from person to person in terms of how they handle him and the influences that they have. And so he becomes older and he goes, well, now I can have a childhood. And to us, it's the weirdest thing ever that you would build this world of being a child.
Yeah.
But if you never were a child,
It makes a lot of sense.
it makes sense. It
makes a lot of
makes
sense.
sense that you would do that.
Absolutely.
Now, that doesn't justify laying in the bed with kids, et cetera, having sleepovers with just a bunch of children. Doesn't make that okay at all. But it does make you go, okay, there's huge trauma, not confronted, not addressed,
That they've experienced.
not even
Right.
factored in some degree, that then informs this behavior that we're seeing.
Right.
And it's just this cycle that we see. Hurt people hurt people.
Yes.
Over and over and over and over.
People
You know what I
hurt
mean?
people.
So-
I'm
And
so-
that needs to be the combo.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that you led talking about both of those case studies by trying to explain their behavior by what they went through, right? Because for
Yes.
me, that is the only thing that, the question, the prompt you posed, as a society, how do we handle it? For me, it's I don't know what that means sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Like what we should do with it in a conversation or on TV and social media is to learn why does it they behave that way? Why is it that like their standard and their values are different from mine?
Yes.
That's what we do with it as a society. There are other mechanisms that can handle punishing him. We don't need to cancel him.
Yeah.
We don't need to do that, right? Like that's going to happen.
Facts.
And I also, and I don't know if this is controversial or not, but I don't have much of a problem separating the art from the artist.
I don't either.
Right? I just don't. For me personally, I don't have a problem with that. Because again, like that's one world that he lives in. Also, if that's your value judgment, you don't want to listen to music anymore. Maybe it makes you think of it. Maybe you feel guilty. Cool.
Yes.
Do that. That's your relationship with that art.
Yes.
Right. But as a society, like we're not responsible for punishing him.
That's right.
I don't think we need to do that.
I agree. I just think people feel like they haven't been punished or they weren't punished, so
Yeah.
we have to then do it.
Exactly.
Right.
Since the law or whatever didn't do that,
Sure.
the parents or whoever
Sure.
was around that
That's
allowed
true.
this all to happen didn't punish him that we should. And I get that point of view. Although I'm with you, I kind of feel like, listen, I just won't listen to his music anymore. I won't go to a concert. That's just me.
Right.
But if you wanted to
Right.
listen to it, I got no problem with that.
Yeah, like if you loved it,
Right.
if you needed it, fine. But
Right.
but at the same time, if you didn't, just because you listened to it per se, in my eyes, in my opinion, you're not supporting the artist in that way.
Correct.
At least
I don't look
to
at you
me, that's
different
the
if
way.
you still played 12 play.
Facts.
It was fire.
Facts. Facts.
I mean, I have no problem with that.
Facts.
It doesn't mean that you support,
Like
keeping
what
women
he
hostage
did.
and raping women. I mean,
Yeah.
it doesn't mean that at all. So,
I
and I
think
think you can separate the two.
Right.
I think that's a huge trend in our society, though, is that society takes upon the role of doling out punishment because punishment is not doled out by
That's
the
right.
court system or
That's
by,
right.
or by authorities. And I think we're seeing that with this. I don't know if it's a resurge, you know what I mean, but this resurge in kind of like protest culture, where it's like, okay, like we cannot trust, and like we cannot trust the courts, we cannot trust law, we can't trust these things to have these things these things get done.
Yes.
We have to take it upon ourselves.
Yes.
And even if we want to try to get it to the courts, we often have to protest, right? Do all these things just to get the ear or the attention to go, okay, I guess we're going to look into this blatant crime and actually go to trial about it as opposed to ignoring it. So I do think that's definitely a bleed over from people seeing, okay, we couldn't get anything done about any of this stuff, but if we as society take it upon ourselves to actually dole out punishment, then the courts step in and say, I guess we'll punish too. You know?
My whole flip side with that is, okay, so R. Kelly goes to jail. What happens next? Do those women feel healed? What actually, because it kind of gets me hot a little bit. But so then what's the result? What are we doing about the other people that aren't as famous as R. Kelly that's out here perpetuating the same kind of stuff?
Yeah.
Like
Other
that's
people
the
just
thing.
as famous who we let slide like him
Facts.
for so long.
Facts.
And still do. Because the reality is there's people that still because R. Kelly was not an unknown thing.
Yes, he's not an
Like,
exception.
you ask people that grew up in Chicago. I was literally talking to someone yesterday,
Yes.
and he's like, yo, my girlfriend at the time, he's like, I was 14 years old. My girlfriend was telling me how R was coming to the school. Like, people knew.
Yes.
This wasn't,
Yes.
this isn't,
And
this
that's
isn't
the
an
conversation.
expose that came
Yes,
out.
and that's the
Scathing
conversation.
report. Yeah, so.
That's the conversation. It's one of those things where I think about it, and I was talking with some friends of mine recently about it, and I was just like, so if you know that as a child, and granted, maybe it's not as cut and dry.
Right.
Like for the most part, this abuse happens in secrecy. The children are ashamed, this, that, and the third.
Yep.
And I get and understand that. But if you do know that your child was exposed or a victim of abuse, there should be ways, there should be avenues, there should be things that we should implement and or do just to make sure that they don't repeat the behavior to other people.
Yeah.
You know, there's this clip that I wanted to get to. I was reading in the paper in the Chicago Tribune, this kid, I think his name is Austin Miller. Let me double check. This YouTube star, Austin Jones, this YouTube sensation who was just sentenced to 10 years because he coerced young girls and sending him naked photos and this, that, and the third. And it was really interesting to hear him articulate how why he did it and how he felt about it. Because when he was younger, he was molested and physically abused by his father. And the judge was like, you of all people know how traumatizing that that is for you, why would you do that to somebody else? And he was like, I wrote this song, and long story short, in the lyrics, it talked about how I have these boxes in my life, and if I don't unpack them, it'll lead to chaos. And he was essentially like, I feel terrible that I created boxes in other people's lives. And it's one of those things where I'm like, these are the conversations that we need to be having. Like wrong is wrong. I get that, but wrong's going to keep on happening if we don't bring solutions into these equations. Like bad is going to always be around.
Psychologically, for a lot of those victims, they end up repeating because they feel like that's the power they then have. So if you were abused, you feel like the only way to get over it yourself is to have that same power, so you then abuse. And now, I don't think that way, but physiologically, I'm not wired that way, but I couldn't fault somebody who is wired that way.
And
right? And there's no avenue for us to allow them to, get away from that before they then do it a second time. Again, not excusing R. Kelly, because of course wrong is wrong, right? But he was abused at 8 years old. I mean, so, who was there to say, listen, you're going on the same path? And by the way, he's hanging out at McDonald's and malls and all that stuff. It's like, you're clearly doing what happened to you. Like, so who stepped in at that point? When Michael Jackson was creating Neverland, somebody knew that he was recreating a childhood he didn't have. So who stepped in and said, we know why you're doing this, we get it, but you can't do it. So here's another avenue for you to get over this without then becoming an abuser.
But I don't think the systems and structures are in place to the degree that we would like. For instance, if someone...
having these conversations yet. Folks are still pointing the fingers, cancel, but we're not like, hey, in the future, how could we go about helping such a thing? And I think that's what I want this conversation to be, is like, let's just stop demonizing and let's actually do something.
Especially with something as sensitive as that. I completely agree. Like, if someone comes to you and says, I'm having these thoughts about younger, girls, younger boys, etc., where would you send them? Where you know that they would be safe to actually process through it and get better. Where would you send them?
That's a great point.
That's fair.
Because as of now, we literally live in a society where it's like, and I hear people say it in response to these things. Oh, special place in hell. We need to. You know what? If someone, I would take them out back. Shoot them in the. We just
as if that's a solution.
But you know what? We need to take everyone who feels that way and just chop off their. You know what I mean? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I understand the anger. Once again, it's wrong. No justification. But if someone's struggling with those thoughts,
where do they go?
And they are aware they're wrong, and they do not want to act upon them. Where in society have we created the place, the system, and the structure for them to enter into? Know that they will be allowed to heal and not act upon those things and then come out and be reintegrated into society. There's no place. There's no place where we wouldn't demonize them and throw them out like trash. You know what I mean? And I think that is why.
Well, I think answering that question is one of our solutions.
You know what I mean? I think that's why this
you just asked a great question that should lead to a solution. That's great.
I have another really profound example about that. At the opportunity to speak to a CPD officer that's almost tenured. I think he's around 24 and a half years. And he had this conversation with me where, it was interesting because in ways he kind of turned himself into a victim. And I wasn't quick to jump down the throat. I just wanted I wanted to hear. It's not too often to actually sit down with police officers. I actually wanted to be like a fly on the wall. And he had said some things that were, what did he say? He said that we as police officers endure trauma on a regular basis. And I was like, you know what, you're right. And I was like, I 100% can't take that experience away from you. And he's like, and what's happening within the police department, which is fascinating. And somebody else can fact check me on this, but this is what I was told from a cop. He said that the CPD hires from within. So if we create a new role, like a new tech job here, or this, that, and the third, we'll just promote an officer to fill that role. And he said that we have therapists in-house, but they're officers. And if you try to go to that in-house therapist telling them that you're struggling with trauma or PTSD, they immediately take you out of your car because they can't rightfully put people out there that say, oh, I'm suffering from PTSD, and then put a gun in my hand. So therefore, no one goes to the therapist because that's an immediate.
You can't get promoted.
And I was just like, oh, it actually gave me real chills. he said some other stuff that was far right. I was just like, nah, I'm not gonna agree with that. I was just like, that right there is a really salient point.
Yeah.
And when will we allow people to have such conversations, because that's the perfect example. You'll be demonized. There's nowhere you can go, and that's just trauma from a job that's obviously going to be traumatic, and they can't even be honest about it. You know, and if we really want things to get better, they should have that option. You know, like they should really have that option. If we really want to, like, woosah. If we want to make things better, we got to be about it. This needs to be a combo.
I think we're close, and we may already be there. We're in a society where problems, actually being human, is a disqualifier, as opposed to a qualifier.
Yes.
Like, to me, I don't want to be led. I don't want to follow. I don't want to work with the person who pretends to have it all together. If you're presenting as perfect, I'm less trustworthy of you than you presenting as non-perfect, because you're blatantly lying to me. At least you're telling me the truth. You know, at least we can work on something.
I love that.
But where we are right now, being human disqualifies you.
So I mean, there's such like a philosophical tension, right, between like, and I'm thinking about education right now, like restorative practices and harsh discipline. I mean, I see every day in my school building people that are firmly in one camp or the other. One, as if it's a binary in the first instance, right? But two, like, people don't want to be soft or people want to be hard, and it's like, and I don't know where on balance we come out. Like, I don't have the data or the wisdom to tell anybody that, you know, but I know that I see it in individual people all the time. And on top of that, what with celebrity worship, you're not, I mean, you want to talk about being soft or being honest or being perfect. I mean, that's what we see all the time from them, right? I mean, like, that's the bargain that we have with them. Like, they're not representing, when they make a mistake, it's because of an exposition, right? It's because because somebody else told on them, right? And so, so we don't have, I mean, like, these ideals that we hold ourselves to and the people that our kids look up to and want to be and idolize, and like, they're not doing any of that, right? It's not on their television screen, which is in their face, you know, 90% of their day probably.
All right, so I'm happy to hear that we clearly agree that cancel culture isn't the solution, and Grace and Evolution isn't going to go about because we're canceling people and saying, no, you can't do that, no, you can't be this, go to jail, like, step down. That's obviously not the answer. What do you think the answer is?
I mentioned this earlier, right? Exposure is all that matters to me. I mean, anecdotally, it's what's defined my perspective and my experience.
Right.
And you know, there's a south side and a north side. You know, and it's not just a racial issue, right? Like,
socioeconomic,
let's integrate people.
That's right.
Yes.
Actually, like, let's actually do it. Right? Let's actually do that. That's it for me. Once you get to know, I mean, it's love. Let me be corny, right? Like,
but that's facts. That's real. That's facts,
but it's real.
Like, when I started to love people of color was when I started to care about this. I didn't care about it before that. I didn't
Facts,
People
bro.
told me to, but I was like, okay. You know, why? Like, why?
Yeah.
Why?
That's real. That's real.
I think I would say, man, we got to be focused on self-accountability rather than with somebody else's actions. You know, I think if you expect excellence of yourself and you focus on that, and if everybody's doing that, everybody's trying to be excellent in their own way, rather than what somebody's telling you you should be. You know, and that crosses racial lines, that crosses socioeconomic lines. You know, are you being the best you can be? I'm not talking about who's around you, who did this, who didn't do that. Are you being the best you can be? You know, and again, there will always be levels of what that is.
Yes.
I mean, that doesn't mean we're all equal on where we end up.
For sure.
Right? But if you're being the best version that you can be on all these issues, I think we'll be in better shape rather than looking outward at what's everybody else doing. You know, let me judge them. You know, it's like, worry about what you're doing. You know, are you being the best you can be? You know, are you being your level of excellence? Might be different to somebody else's, but are you achieving that excellence that you think is attainable to you? You know, I think if you do that, start looking at other people, you know, you wouldn't worry about cancel culture.
Facts.
You wouldn't have to.
Right? Because we wouldn't be concerned about it.
Right.
Yeah. I think from cancel culture, I do think the aspect of calling things what they are is healthy. I think the problem is that we often focus on the symptom and we don't focus on the actual disease.
Preach.
And I think when you want to cure anything, you focus on the disease, not the symptom. So I think for us, we have to start focusing on the disease and not the symptom. And I think people and individuals are actually symptoms. you know? And I think sometimes we look at it and we go, okay, we need to cancel this person and it'll solve everything.
Yes.
Well, all you did was just solve the symptom.
Yes.
You haven't actually dealt with the real disease. And so I think we need to call things out, call them what they are, say, hey, this is not okay.
Yeah.
But then we need to have a higher level conversation and go, where does this come from? Why does this still persist?
Yes.
How does someone in power, someone who's in celebrity, someone who's in a place of influence, how are they allowed to continue in this way? Let's talk about the disease and let's talk about actions that we can all take to actually deal with this disease in our own life. As opposed to going, oh my gosh, we saw this, cancel the symptom, everything's solved, make sure to share it, make sure to like it, post on your story.
Retweet.
Now we're good, okay? And then we basically kind of, go, wow, I solved the world's problems by like retweeting something. When the actual way we solve it is by working, is by having tough conversations, is by loving people that aren't like us, is by taking self-responsibility, self-accountability for what you're doing. I think all those things factor in, but I do think that we just have to not get distracted with the symptoms. We have to focus on the disease and call things what they are, but we should spend the least bit of our time on the person and the actual issue. I'm like R. Kelly. Smallest part of it, okay, R. Kelly, it's horrible, blah, blah, et cetera. Like, this is how much we're going to focus on him.
Yeah.
Now let's focus on the actual disease, the actual issue. How can we move this around? Because the problem is, like, folks out here, like, I ain't going to listen to R. Kelly, but you won't talk to your cousin who does the same thing.
Think about often, like, there's a lot of things going on in the world that are not ideal, that are pretty terrible. And because we're not close to it, we don't feel it the same way. We don't even think about it because it's not within our daily lives. I think that exposure and being open matters. I think that treating the problem and not the symptom matters. And something else that I want to add to this conversation, I think is interesting and pretty nuanced. And I had learned recently from, there's this HBO documentary I highly recommend. It's called One Nation Under Stress. And the neuroscientist had said that empathy is a very high level executive functioning skill. And if you've experienced trauma, your ability to empathize with anything is stunted. You it's actually on like a physiological level, it changes in people. And I'm telling you, when I heard that, I was just like, because sometimes I'm just like, why can't you see things the way I see it? Like, why can't we come at this from a standpoint of like, you can't maybe try to walk in their shoes, and some folks really have a hard time doing that, and knowing that like in navigating these spaces where the majority of us, if not all of us, really need to practice, we all need to practice mental health rituals and like self-affirmations and like do that. The people that aren't, they're people that are completely neglecting their mental and spiritual selves. And I think we, as people who want to be solution-oriented, who want to help others, need to navigate through these spaces in such a way where you have a bit more understanding, you have a bit more leniency, and realize that in some shape, way, or form, and not to make it like a hierarchy, but like being able to have empathy is a blessing, and acknowledge it as such. Don't get tired of being woke. Don't get no. Like you're actually fortunate that you have that capacity, and I just think that that's something that we don't talk enough about.
That's what my girlfriend said to me today when I was on my way over here. She was like, "Listen, babe, don't be nervous. All you have to do is show up and be yourself."
Facts.
I'm trying to say something nobody ever heard before. Because I'm in my notebook, like, what the hell am I gonna? That's what she said, but it's so real.
I agree.
And one last thing that needs to be said, right? And it should be me that says it, right? Is that people that look like me need to have this conversation with people that look like me. Right, like power needs to speak to power. Period. Right, and that's something, man. That's something that I struggle with. To be totally We want to talk about being transparent. That's something that passes me by sometimes when I'm at a dinner table with my family or with a friend, and I'm not in the mood because I have the privilege of opting out of that conversation and not dealing with that burden. Right, I can be here and experience like a black joy and have this conversation with you all, and then I can opt out of having that conversation because I'm tired on a Thursday night, and you don't have that luxury. And like that's something that I need to do personally, but that's definitely something that people that look like me and are in positions of power like me need to do.
But people look like us need to do the same thing. That's two-way.
True.
That is two-way.
True.
So.
True.
Yeah. This was great, man. I mean, this was fire.
Good
Yes.
stuff.
This is why we do it. You know?
Right.
This is why we do it right here.
That's good.
I have to say thank you very, very much for joining me. This was dope. This was super productive.